So my name's Clare Barber. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and today hopefully you're logged in to listen to me talk about dementia care in a digital era. So we're going to look at the new digital innovations that are happening in the country and things that can support with dementia care. I'm joined today by my colleague Chloe Bromhead. She's also an occupational therapist. It's normally her job to do these webinars today, so she's off the hook for us, but she will be joining us for a panel session at the end. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we will address them all at the end of the session. So just want to introduce us as a team and who we are. We are Beanbag Care, part of the Secure group, which I'll tell you a little bit about at the moment. We are a small team, but a very friendly bunch. So if you do have any questions after the webinar, we're always here to reach out and our contact details are at the end. We have 3 business development managers as part of our team based in the North, Midlands and South. Kat, Rick, and Cameron, unfortunately, are all out doing some busy stuff, talking to customers at the moment, so haven't joined us today. And we're very, very lucky that we have 2 occupational therapists on the team that help with product development, assessments, training, that kind of stuff. And also for any questions that you might have around technology, we're always happy to grab an email and answer any, provide any support you might need. We also have Hirsch, who is our tech support and knows a lot more about technology than I can offer. But again, always there to answer questions if you have any. So just to give you a little bit of background about the company, Secure Meters is a family-run business, but an international business. They are based in India, but we do have over 60 different countries that we sell products to, including the UK, and over 7,200 employees across 6 different continents. So a massive organization. Products and services that we offer started out around the metering industry and have spread across the world from that perspective. And often that these products will help the users save money, reduce energy usage, and live in comfort. And after a while, they realized that they were good at manufacturing these types of devices and wanted to reach out into other areas. So created Beanbag Care, which is kind of a baby of the owner of the company. He really wants to help people. We already have over 10 million devices in the UK today, and we manufacture those and actually collect data from them, store that data and provide it to those that need to have it. So all good. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit of a background into dementia. I would imagine quite a few of you here already know what dementia is and how it impacts people. But dementia is the umbrella term for a number of conditions that impact the brain, and unfortunately is a progressive condition that will affect things like memory, function, so being able to remember things, understand how things work, sequencing, processing of information. Currently today, it affects over 982,000 people that live in their own home. There are more than that living with dementia in care homes, hospitals, residential care, but these live in their own home. But this number is actually could be a lot more, and probably is a lot more, because there are a lot of people that won't get diagnosed until later on. And as we age, as we know, our memories start to become a little bit fuzzy. So people often mistake it with just frailty or old age. So there probably are a lot more than the 982,000 that are currently recorded. Costs of providing support for people living with dementia are very high, and actually an average of 500,000 per person in this sort of lifespan towards the point from the point of diagnosis could be spent in supporting them. So obviously a large impact on our NHS, on our local authorities, on our care bill. Unfortunately, decline when somebody is admitted to some sort of care home, residential nursing care can be quite rapid. The change of environment can actually decrease the length of life. So on average, it's around about 2.5 years from the point of admission to the person actually passing away. And generally, this is down to the person being unfamiliar with their surroundings and suddenly losing that independence. A poll was taken, and 85% of people living with dementia actually state that they'd prefer to stay in their own home for longer. And I think that's probably the case for most of us. We don't really want to go into residential care or nursing care when we get to that stage. You want to be in your own surroundings. And actually, there is research that shows health and well-being is maintained for longer if the person does stay in their home. And generally, that's owing to the fact that they feel safer, they're in surroundings that they recognize or feel more attuned to. They are knowing, where things are. They're able to still interact in meaningful activities. They are closer to family and friends. So all of this stuff helps them with their well-being, with their health. It helps keep them independent and moving around the home. You're actually 20% more likely to fall in a care home than in your own environment if you live with dementia. So, actually, putting a person living with dementia into a care home can increase their risks rather than decrease them in some situations. So now that we've looked at the stats, we're going to have a little look at what sort of needs people who live with dementia have. And often these are very wide reaching, and it will depend on the person, their environment, the support network they have around them, their families, the condition they have, the age. So there's a lot of different factors. But when I considered this and looking back through my career of working with people with dementia, there were some key ones that come up really regularly. And I don't think you'll be surprised that safety is probably the first one. Often, those living with dementia will forget. For example, they've put a pan of water on the gas stove to boil to cook some dinner and then forget about it. Water overboils, turns out, or extinguishes the flames, and then gas is now leaking into the property, which obviously can cause fire risk and be unsafe for the person living there. Other factors are things like leaving the property, not locking the property, letting people into the property that shouldn't be coming in, um, falls, not managing the environments well. Self care can often be a factor. So, people forgetting to take medication, which obviously impact their health, but also being able to wash and dress themselves, remember to eat appropriately and drink appropriately at the right times during the day can really impact somebody's health as well. Anxiety. So often those, especially at the early stages of dementia, it's quite heartbreaking to see. They know that they have something wrong with them. They are starting to decline from a memory perspective, and that can make people extremely anxious and worried as to what's going on. And you can imagine being in this environment on your own in a property, not really remembering how you got there or why you're there, thinking potentially that you have to be somewhere else, or having people come into your home that you don't know and you're not trusting. So it can cause extreme anxiety and even depression in some cases. Finance has always been a big factor, and often people will struggle with bills coming in, knowing when to pay them. Also, very vulnerable and open to people abusing finances for people living with dementia. I actually had a patient who lived at home, had no family support. Fortunately, and quite rightly, she failed a driving test. I think she went through three red lights on the test. So we had to arrange for her car to be removed because even though we told her and we put notices up and we, stopped her from trying to use the car, she would still go out and we needed to make it safe. So she agreed that we could sell this car for her. We listed it, went away, came back a couple of weeks later, and actually found the car was gone. She couldn't tell me where it went, but told me there was a man at the door that she gave the keys to. So we don't know whether she received any financial remuneration for that, or whether somebody just came to the house and took the car. So real risk for people. Home management can be a difficulty, so keeping your house warm or keeping it cool in the heat, not that we get much of that in this country, but also making sure that it's in good repair, it's tidy and clean, and managing those sorts of things. And lastly, I think one of the big factors, especially around those of the later stages of dementia, is carer burnout. It is extremely difficult looking after somebody with dementia, especially at those towards the end stages. It's a 24/7 job. And even for those living on their own in their own home, families that live locally are likely to be having to visit regularly, even multiple times a day. So it can mean that the carer is unable to do the things they want to do, like going out for a coffee with friends, attending work, going on holiday, and are feeling like they're getting burnt out and stressed. So, unfortunately, dementia is a progressive condition. There's nothing we can do to cure it. There are things that we can do to delay the symptoms of dementia. And if we catch it early enough in those early stages, things like cognitive stimulation therapies and medication can. Prolong that early stage and stop them from progressing as quickly. And cognitive stimulation therapies are based on keeping your brain active. So, in that early stage, it's really important to try and make sure that person continues to maintain their skills and engage in those meaningful occupations that they like to do. And that could be going out on walking groups, doing knit and natters, going to friends for coffee, and actually maintaining their independence in their own home and managing themselves well. The lady I was telling you about earlier was early stage. She used to book her own cruises every year and go off on a cruise ship around the world. Once a year, and that was her kind of meaningful occupation. She'd spend a lot of time looking at travel destinations and planning those. And as she started moving into the mid stages, we would be able to support her with those. So, in that early stage, often things that may need support are things like financial support. So, helping that person understand bills, making sure they're paying things in the right way, and actually, as I said, maintaining those independent skills. As somebody progresses, usually we get to this sort of mid stage, and that mid stage generally it means the person may develop some needs around support with their ADL. So I'm talking about things like washing, dressing, being able to eat and drink for themselves, making sure they're remembering to take their medication, those types of activities. And also, at this point, normally people need to take over the control of their finances because that becomes too much of a difficulty for them. Unfortunately, often the disease will progress into a later stage. And at this point, often it's where we will admit them to some sort of full care facility, care home, or residential or nursing care, or care is provided in the home. And those visits of frequent or living care is provided. But one of the real difficulties for us as professionals is knowing at what point on that journey we start to implement that support. And for me, I'm aware that if I implement it too early, I'm starting to take away some of that independence and potentially increasing the decline in their condition. So, getting the timing of this right is really important. And it's often very difficult to gauge because the person often cannot tell you clearly what it is that they're managing to do and what they're not managing to do, and not being able to see them in their environment during the day and at night to understand that is quite difficult. So knowing when to implement that support is really hard. It's also very difficult if you implement support to then take it away. So often, once carers are allocated, it will be near on impossible to stop those from going in if they're not needed as much because people become reliant on them. And actually, as I say, you start to disable the person a little bit more. So, as we know, one of the symptoms of dementia is that your cognition starts to decline, your brain starts to be impacted, and capacity becomes a difficulty. And that's really important when it comes to interventions and solutions, especially around technology. And we have a piece of legislation which is fantastic in the UK called the Mental Capacity Act. Now, I'm not here to teach you all about law, you'll be happy to know, but just to kind of give you an idea of the sorts of things that we need to consider. So, firstly, there's five key points in the Mental Capacity Act, and the first thing is around the presumption of capacity. So, we have to assume that everybody has capacity with, even if they live with dementia. So, just because you have a diagnosis with dementia doesn't mean to say you don't have capacity. And every adult has a right to make their own decisions. The capacity needs to be assessed at every decision. So, if the person is at the stage where we're wondering whether support is needed, we need to conduct an assessment of capacity at that point. It might mean that that person doesn't have capacity to make those choices, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't have capacity to choose the color of their furniture or the cup of tea or coffee that they're going to have that afternoon. So it's really important that we are doing those assessments based on decisions, not based on the person. And capacity, as we know, fluctuates, especially with conditions like dementia. So it might be that you have to ask the questions to them multiple times at multiple points in the day on different days, so that you've done everything you can to assess that capacity. There is legal support around this. So, if you, while you did have capacity, appointed a lasting power of attorney for health and well-being, because there are different types, then that person can make decisions on behalf of the person living with dementia, because they have, in their young years or before they became incapacitated, have made the decision that somebody else could make choices on their behalf. The law also states that we have to support the person to make that decision. So, as I said before, if the person does have fluctuating capacity and actually is better first thing in the morning, then it might be that we have to visit them first thing in the morning to have those conversations. We have to support that person within our everything within our power, really, to help them understand that information. And that might be that we have to visit a different time, write it down, use different ways to communicate it to them multiple times. But the person has to be able to take that information on board, retain that information, and weigh it up to come up with a decision, and then verbalize or communicate that decision back to you. And that's how they determine that somebody is able to do so. Really difficult one for me as a professional who wants to care and look after people, but people do have the right to make unwise decisions, and we make them all the time. I had a chocolate bar for breakfast. I know I shouldn't, and it's probably not the healthiest thing for me to eat, but it was an unwise choice, but I have the power to make it. We are lucky in this country, we have human rights, and as adults, we should be able to make unwise choices if we want to. I had a horrible case of a situation where a lady'd had diabetes that was not very well controlled, which resulted in her needing an amputation of the lower leg. At this point, there was varying capacity with her, but it was deemed that she did have capacity to make the choice as to whether this leg was removed or not, and actually chose to not remove the leg with the full knowledge that this would actually kill her. And she chose to keep the leg and unfortunately die, rather than lose a leg and live with a missing limb. So I would class that personally as an unwise decision, but in her mind and her choice. So she gets to make that choice. If a decision cannot be made by the person because they don't have capacity, then we have to work in what's called their best interests. So we have to take that decision on their behalf. And that's where a lasting power of attorney isn't available. It will need to be down to a multidisciplinary discussion, and we need to pull in people from lots of different places to have those discussions. But it's really important that we think about what would the person have done if they did have capacity. And it's very difficult to take yourself out of the decisions thinking like you are, um, and thinking from another person's perspective. Lastly, and I think we should apply this in everything that we do as professionals, but we should always use the least restrictive option. So if there are options available to us, the one that restricts the person's independence the least, allows them to have freedoms, and still actually achieve the intended outcome safely, would be the right choice to make. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. So, just to reiterate some of those considerations, what I would ask myself when I'm conducting an assessment with someone for dementia is things like, what would they do if they could make that decision? And that would need to be deemed from lots of information you've gathered about what the person's done in their life before, how they've managed things, what decisions they've made in the past. What is the alternative? So there can't just be one solution. There is always alternatives. And sometimes the alternative is to do nothing. We need to bring in family or people that they know best and ask them what they think, because they will know the person better than we will ever know them, and they have to be involved in these conversations. As I say, we need to use the least restrictive solution, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. We also have to consider, actually, if the solution is technology, for example, Are they actually going to accept that solution? Or is it going to increase the risk if I install something into their property that they're not going to want or use? We need to weigh up whether that risk is reduced or increased by our interventions. Are we depriving the person of their independence or enabling it? Because let's be honest, our aim here really is to keep the person safe, but also to enable their independence, to keep them active in their own home. And weighing that up and looking at all of those different things using our clinical reasoning, does the benefit outweigh the intrusion or the intervention that we're looking to provide? So, just to put that into context, this is George. He has early stage dementia. He lives at home on his own and he has his family close by. He has been known to forget his medication, which is obviously now impacting his health, and his health is declining. He does tend to leave the doors open in the property and forgets to shut them and lock them. He has stopped answering the telephone. So, the family who are really concerned about him have no way of communicating with him and checking on him, which has meant that they are now visiting him twice a day, once before work and once after work. That's causing some fractures in the relationship with the family because the family are becoming exhausted, but also they are under this constant anxiety of worrying about him. But also, George himself doesn't want the family popping in twice a day and is starting to get a little bit frustrated with why they're there all the time. There is some question around his settledness at night, and they're finding evidence in the morning when they go in that he has been up and moving things around, moving furniture, and actually getting less rest when he needs it, which also is impacting his health. So, what are our intervention options for this? What could we do? And in my mind, there's probably lots, but I've pulled it down to kind of four main things that we could look to do. Carers normally is a first thought in the mind. Okay, could we provide some care to visit daily? They could prompt medication, they can keep an eye on his well-being. Possibly we could look at a sleeping night if he is that unsettled at night, or having a visit just before bedtime to help settle him a little bit. We could ask the family if he's willing to move in with them, and then he'll have constant supervision and constant support. We could admit him to a care home at this point. He will definitely be provided with that constant support and may well be a little bit safer. Or we could add some technology into the home. Now, all of these options are viable. First one is likely to be costly. You are then starting to take away some of George's independence. He's already getting angry with family visiting. He might not be accepting of care, but actually, does he really need it at this stage? And I think often when we come down to prescribing things or recommending things, it's got to be down to needs because of the pot of money that we have to pull from. Moving in with his family sounds like a lovely option, but not necessarily for the family. They probably don't want the strain of having that loved one living with them. They are probably out at work all day. They may not have the space. And again, we are still reducing his independence and his autonomy, and it's likely that something George would probably not want to do. If we admitted him to a care home, it's an extremely large cost, and as I've mentioned earlier, there's likely going to be more deterioration, loss of independence, and actually, it's a really stressful thing for everybody, family, George himself, to do. So, which of these would be the least restrictive intervention? Likely the technology. So let's take a look at some technology that you can use to support people living with dementia. We're going to work through a few quite common ones that you'll come across. Firstly, the smart speakers. Most people have them in their homes nowadays. There's a few different types on the market. They are absolutely brilliant because they are pretty cost effective. They're plug and play. So you get them out the box, plug them in, and they're ready to go. Um, they do a lot of different functions. So you can add reminders on them. So if medication's a difficulty, then you could ask the device to remind somebody about medication. You can communicate through it. So you can make calls to loved ones. You can kind of call for help if you need to. And it's great because you can do shopping lists, you can do weather reports, news reports, it can set alarms to wake people up. So lots of different options, play music, you can use it for reminiscence, quizzes, all of those types of things that are going to really help people living with dementia. There are some downsides to it, however. I don't know how many of you out there have these smart speakers in your homes, but much to my partner's disgust, I love technology and I have one in every room in my house, and it is not always that reliable. I tried to put something on my shopping list yesterday and it couldn't recognize what I was saying. So apparently now I'm buying clippers, which is not what I asked to put on the shopping list. Sometimes it won't pick up my voice. Sometimes it will speak out. And there are settings on these things that you can change, but often it will tell me that, for example, Amazon has a discount on one of the things I've been looking at in my Amazon shopping. It can also have strange lights that come up, and for somebody living with dementia who may not have an ability to retain information, may find that quite distracting or worrying. And also, it's this voice from beyond. You don't know where the source of this has come from, and that in itself can cause some anxiety. Lastly, the data. So there is often conversations around the safety of data, and these devices are listening all the time. They are taking on information and storing that information. So it's about how that data is managed. And yes, you can turn some security settings on to stop these from happening, but it's that unknown, isn't it? It's what is it that it's taking in? Another option, and quite common, they've been around for donkey's years now, are pendants. And most people over a certain age, if they start to fall, it's our go-to for their support. And generally, you wear it as a watch or as a pendant around your neck or as a brooch, and you push the button when you need help. Great, simple solution, quite cost effective. They're very cheap. However, there is evidence to show that over 80% of people that have a pendant either forget to wear it or, even if they are wearing it, won't push it. And we've had clients that have had our system installed that have had pendants, and actually, when they've fallen, they haven't pushed the pendant at all. You can get false alerts from leaning on it. You have to remember to charge it. So there are some downsides to it as well, especially for those living with dementia. So not necessarily a great solution for all. One of the real kind of things often when we talk about ethics and dementia is this kind of monitoring a person, and GPS trackers are quite common because people with dementia will often leave the property, go out for a walk, and then be unable to find their way home and become lost. So GPS trackers have a fantastic place in this to be able to support that person. It will be able to set up geofences, they're called. So as soon as the person leaves the property, it activates. And then at a certain point, when you've set it, it could be half a mile from home, it could be a mile from home, it will then start sending signals to say where that person is. That way, if the person does leave the property and does walk and get lost, at least you can find them easily, which is a really benefit. I had a client who was a keen bike rider, and he would get on his bike and ride 4 miles. At the time, I lived in Dorset, and we'd find him in Hampshire quite easily, ridden 30 plus miles. So having something like this would have been essential. And we were very lucky. Often people would find him and find a way of getting him back to us, but a very difficult situation. Part of the issue with GPS trackers, though, is that you have to take it with you. So if the person forgets to take their keys and you've put it on their keys, they're not going to be tracked. You can put it in people's shoes, people's coats, people's clothing. But again, if they're not wearing those particular shoes or clothing, it can be a difficulty. So there is a worry around that. And also around the response to it. So we're not allowed to restrict a person. If you gave the neighbour the rights to the pendant, so you could to the tracker, so you could see where they were, and they went out every time the person left the property and brought them back home, we are restricting their freedom. We're stopping them from going out and doing what they want to do. But you also do have to have a neighbour or a family member or somebody that's willing to track that and be able to do something about it afterwards. So if the person does become lost, confused, then they can actually go out and retrieve and bring them back to somewhere safe. Automation, smart homes, again, is becoming a lot more mainstream nowadays. Back when I started as an OT, showing my age now, it was kind of reserved for people who were unable to manage from disability or frailty. But now most people will have some sort of smart technology in their property. As I said, I'm a big tech fan, hence why I work in the tech industry. My home is automated from start to finish. So I can lay in my bed, turn my shower on, turn my kettle on without even getting up. I can turn my heating on when I'm out doing the shopping so that when I get home, the house is nice and warm. That's fantastic. But for somebody living with dementia, it can make it a little bit confusing. So, for example, often people will put sensors where a person gets out of bed, notices at night that the person has moved, will turn on the hallway light or a lamp to show that person a way to the toilet. But actually, that could stop the person from going to the thing that they were supposed to be doing and look for a way of where's this light come on from? How has it come on? How do I turn it back off again? I don't need a light, it's nighttime. Or it could mess with the sort of circadian rhythms of the person, so if you suddenly put on a bright light in the middle of the night, that could wake somebody up and then they'd be unable to sleep or think it's daytime and start their normal day. So living with dementia, some of the automations that you would be putting in might actually cause more harm than good. The other thing to consider as well is that they are a little bit complex to set up and again can be a little bit unreliable in some cases. So if suddenly the light switch stops working, then that person may not be able to turn that light on and off at all. And who is going to set all that up? Who's going to manage that? Smart doorbells, I think these are a fantastic invention, and again, very mainstream. Most people have them on the front doors now. Brilliant for Amazon deliveries when you're out and about. And absolutely great for people who do either have people come into the home that shouldn't be coming into the home, or you want to see if the person's left the property. So, a lot of these smart doorbells will actually send a notification to an app to say this person's left or whatever. So, really useful. Um, one of the problems, obviously, is that you have to install them. They're quite effective, but there's battery and wired-in versions. If they're battery, they need charging, so somebody needs to go around there probably once every fortnight to stick that on charge. Somebody needs to be there watching it to make sure that if the person is getting visitors, who they are. It's not going to stop the visitors coming in. So you'll have evidence that it's happened, but it won't stop the person coming in. And actually, if they have left the property at that point, you still don't know where they've gone. So it again is a concern. The other thing is obviously that, should we be knowing if they're leaving the property? Is that something that is actually required? And we should be only prescribing technology based on what the need is. We shouldn't, as with all interventions, over prescribe things. Lastly, and most worryingly, cameras. A lot of people, and I think this kind of came a trend after the whole. I think there was a watchdog or a panorama that filmed somebody in a care home and carers providing care. Cameras are readily available now, again, quite cost effective. I have to say, awfully, we did actually install one in my mother-in-law's who had a stroke because we wanted to be able to check on her if we needed to. She lives very far away, but actually, for us, it hasn't helped at all. It's increased anxiety because I only know how she is when I log in and look at the camera. I can get it to sort of send me messages every time it senses movement, but she's obviously walking around a house all the time, so that's not helping me at all. And how do I know when there's a problem? I can only log in when I log in. I'm not alerted to any concerns. But the most difficult thing here is it's extremely intrusive. Do you want to be watched 24/7? And should you be watched 24/7? Ethically, I would argue that a lot of people wouldn't agree to have those. My mother in law did, by the way. So I was within ethical boundaries. But it is very intrusive. And for somebody living with dementia, they could become quite paranoid or worried by what this thing is in their house that suddenly appeared. So there are some concerns around technology and a lot of things that can stop people from being able to prescribe them for people. And one of them, biggest, is acceptance. And we'll talk a little bit more around digital literacy and how that works. But people have to agree to have this stuff in their home if they have capacity to do so. If they don't have capacity and we're prescribing it for them and we've had that best interests decision, Actually, even if we did install it, are they going to accept it? Are they going to use it? Are they going to interact with it? Unplugging is a big factor for people, and we have found this quite often when installing technology with people living with dementia. And it's quite a common thing for especially the older generation. They all get to the end of the night, and as part of their routine, they'll go around, switch all the plug sockets off, which is great, saves electricity, it saves risk of fire, reduces risk of fire. But if you've got a device that's a kind of monitoring device or an emergency alerting device, and you've turned that off, it's not going to work. So we need to kind of consider, is that something they're going to likely do? Removing items is a real big issue. And we have had instances where we've had people who live with dementia that have had some sort of engineering or electrical trade in their past, and that's what they've done all their lives. We had one gentleman whose family had put a light up outside. So when he went out, the light came on so he could take the bins out more safely. However, he didn't remember that that's what's been happened. He'd gone outside at night time to do his normal put bits in the bin. Light came on, and he decided that he didn't want that light there. So he went and got his tools out his shed, his ladder, climbed the ladder, and started unwiring it and taking it out. Obviously, we've now increased the risk. There's a gentleman at in the middle of the night up a ladder without turning the power off, removing a light. Luckily, we were fine and nothing untoward happened, but the light wasn't there anymore. So people can want to remove, and especially if it's an item that's glaringly obvious in their home, they may try and unplug it and remove it. Are they able to use it and interact with it? So, as I've stated before, a lot of these devices require somebody to do things with it. Are they going to be able to do that? Are they going to be able to interact in the way that we need to? And are they going to be able to retain information about how they work or what they're doing? One of the symptoms of dementia is the inability to kind of lay down new memory. So, are they going to be able to take on board what you've told them and continue to use it? A lot of devices need internet access, and it actually shocked me how many people in the country at the moment do not have the internet. And that might be down to digital poverty. It might just be down to the fact they don't need the internet. They've never used it, they're never going to need it. So, why would they have it? So, internet access is quite an important factor. And if they don't have internet, there are other options. So, you can put in things like SIM cards. But I live in deepest, darkest Devon. So for me, actually, there's a wide area here in this part of the world that doesn't have phone signal still. So if you have no signal, how are you going to manage that? What are you going to do? Payment is always going to be an issue. So you have to pay for technology. Technology has a cost involved. Normally, the cost comparison to care or other alternatives is actually quite good, but there still needs to be a payment. So local authorities may fund it, but normally there's an ongoing fee for monitoring, for internet, for signal, SIM cards. Who's going to pay for that? And the person has to have that buy-in. They have to be willing to pay for it if it's down to them to pick up that cost. And lastly, response. There's some cracking bits of technology in the market that will really support people, but if there's no one at the other end of them to be able to respond to the issues, then actually, is there any much point? What is the point in taking all this data on somebody if there's nobody to do anything about it? So there really needs to be somebody involved in their care that will be able to take on that, or an external company that's willing to do that. But it's really down to that balance. We want to increase the person's autonomy, increase their independence, but without um, and reduce their safety. But we don't want to increase risk. We want to make sure that there's a healthy balance between autonomy and independence and safety. Often, if we wrap someone up in cotton wool and stop them from doing things, their safety will increase. They'll be at less risk, but their independence and their autonomy will be declined. If we give them more independence and we let them go out that door and walk off, or we keep them in their own environment without support, then obviously their safety is going to reduce, but their independence is going to increase. So it's really important to get that balance. And that is a very difficult thing to do. So ethics. Ethics is one of the biggest parts, isn't it? It's one of the things that we really need to consider when we're talking about people with dementia. And it's what guides us as professionals. As OTs, we have our own code of practice that we sign up to. And there are a few things that we have to consider. Respect for autonomy. So it really remains central. Even when a person lacks capacity, we really need to respect their choice, their freedom. So ethical use of technology really involves supporting that individual to participate in decisions to the fullest extent we can humanly possibly allow them to. And that means giving accessible information, considering supporting decision making approaches, having those kind of discussions with wider people. We should always avoid blanket approaches. It's one of my biggest bugbears that often there'll be just a standard stock answer to things. So it might be somebody's falling, we'll give them a pendant. That's what we do. But that shouldn't be the case. It should be very person centered. It should align to the person's needs, their values, and their preferences. We need to think about proportionality. We need to consider what is proportionate for the needs. So we need to, as I've said before, go with the least restrictive option. Technology should only be used when an actually necessity, there's a reason for it to be there. And again, technology is wide reaching. So we should be only using it in the problem areas, the difficult areas, the safety issue areas. So we really must balance the benefits of that increased safety with the potential for restriction or control. We need to consider informed consent. And we've talked a lot about capacity and consent, but it's important to try and get that informed consent from the person. And as I said, it must be a decision specific basis. And if the person lacks capacity, we need to work in their best interests. For decisions about technology, when you have made decisions for that person under best interests, then we need to make sure we're recording it appropriately. So you need to write down the rationale, what alternatives we've considered, how the person's wishes and values were taken into account, who else we've spoken to and included in these decisions. Really important to consider. Privacy is a fundamental human right, even for people with dementia. And I know that sounds crazy and it should be common sense, but unfortunately, it is still quite a bit of a problem in this country. So we need to make sure that dignity and privacy is preserved at all costs. And so technology that monitors people in private spaces like your bedroom, your bathroom, we really have to do some ethical scrutiny here before we implement those types of things. So there has to be measures taken to really minimize any intrusion and make sure that the data that we're gathering about the person is used and handled in a sensitive way and only provided to those people that need it and can action it. For example, avoiding constant video surveillance unless there's a really compelling, really well risk assessed, really documented need, without using kind of other alternatives that are less invasive. Equality and digital inclusion is important. So we have a moral duty to make sure that all individuals can benefit from appropriate technology, regardless of their background, their social economics, their literacy, so their ability to understand how technology works, their cognitive ability. We need to do our utmost to ensure that everybody is treated in the same way. Making sure that everybody has the right to learn to how to use these things, or actually creating products and using products that allow that digital inclusion. One thing that we should always be is transparent and accountable. So, everybody that is going to be involved in this technology, and that includes people like care providers, families, advocates, anybody that really is involved in that person's care and support, needs to understand what the technology is. Why is it being used? What it does? Who's responsible for it? Who oversees it? Who takes all that information in? And we really need to make sure that we're aligning to the UK practices around GDPR, looking at the NHS digital standards and the MCA code of practice to make sure that we are using lawful and ethical data. We, as I've said, need to balance that safety and positive risk taking. In this country, we are very risk averse. We don't like people hurting themselves, understandably, when we can do something about it. But there's a real lot of evidence around positive risk taking. Enabling that person to do things independently is really positive and beneficial. So we need to encourage that as much as possible. And technology can actually do that in some cases. But we have to be still very mindful that technology should not replace human judgment, compassion, and care. There's a lot of conversation around AI at the moment and how AI can take people's jobs. I'm still jury's out on this. As an occupational therapist, there's a lot of things I consider when I'm making judgments and making interventions and making recommendations. Yes, AI can support me with my process and give me information on interventions I may not have thought of, help me with best practice. But actually, there's a lot of considerations that we need to do beforehand. So often we really need to have that human judgment, that human compassion involved in this. And sometimes technology works best when it's alongside other forms of support like care. So one of the pieces of technology that I've kind of referred to a little bit throughout the presentation, but not really discussed, is activity monitoring. And this is quite a up and coming area of technology, and a lot of people are using it for assessment purposes at the moment. But actually is really good with people living with dementia. It uses sensors that generally are placed around the home, and these sensors pick up information about what the person's doing, but it's not filming them, it's not listening to them in most cases, and it is just taking information about movement mostly, or sitting, and using that information to make assumptions based on normal activity of that person. Generally, it will then collate that information and send it to a nominated person. And that could be a carer, it could be a professional, it could be a GP, it could be anyone that needs that information. Um, and that information could be varied. It could be anything from massive reports of every piece of activity that person's done due to just the basics that are needed. It can be done very person centered because you can put these sensors in places just specifically where that person has needs. It will recognize and learn behaviors. It will be able to be set so that it knows, for example, when somebody goes to bed, when somebody gets up, when somebody should or shouldn't be leaving the property. So it can be made really person centered. And it really does allow for early detection of difficulties. So, if, for example, the person's spending more time in bed, not moving around as much, or started to move around a lot more, not sleeping at night, that could be an early detection of a health deterioration or a cognitive deterioration. And if we can pick these up early, we may be able to limit the impact, reduce the deterioration, or stop it completely if it's something like a health condition. The other great thing about activity monitoring and the way it's being used quite commonly is around care planning. So, as I said at the beginning, we know at some point this person is likely to need some more support. But at what point do we deliver that support? So, if we can gather actual data about what happens for that person in their day, what they're doing and how they're doing it, then we can really work to make their care and support more person centered. So rather than ringing a care agency saying, I think this person's struggling in the morning, they say, oh, I've got a slot at 9 o'clock, we'll stick them in there. We could actually go, well, do you know what? In the morning, they're getting out of bed at 7 in the morning, but they're not actually getting dressed or doing anything until 10 o'clock. So we maybe need to be there at 7 to get them out of bed and support that, or we maybe just need to pop in at 10 to help them with their breakfast. But at 9 o'clock, that might not be the right or best time. The real good thing about this is that all of the policy and law and legislation, everything that comes out at the moment tells us that we have to use strength based approaches. We have to use what the person can do already, what benefits, what things have they got, what strengths have they got around them that they can use to stay independent. And we have to be looking at preventing things, not working on a kind of crisis management case. So we should be going in and supporting the person before it escalates to that point, which is really, really difficult to do. Technology enables that, technology helps that. So I've been talking to you a lot about technology in an overview fashion, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview as to what we do at Beanbag Care, just so that you've got a bit of idea of why I'm telling you all this stuff. So we have a cloud-based system that supports people to live in their own homes independently. There is a tablet in the center of the home, which has been designed with the Older People's Forum, and it can be used really simply just to do a few tasks, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. We then place a range of sensors around the home in a very person-centered manner, depending on the need, and information that's is then sent to a responder, um, or escalated to our contact center, which is open 24/7 to support the person. But the information that's fed is based on algorithms and exceptions. So I'm not going to tell you that mum got up at 10 o'clock, had 3 wees, made a cup of tea, made a sandwich, then went round to the neighbours, then did this, then did that, then did this. I'm going to tell you if any of that stuff is outside of her normal situation, her normal patterns of movement, or if any of that stuff is a risk or unsafe. So I wanted to share with you just some case studies around how we've found we've used our technology with people living with dementia, just to put it into context. So all of the people I'm going to talk to you about today live alone. They all have got a history of falls. They've all had some sort of declining health recently, and obviously have been presented to social care because of those things. They all have memory difficulties, so they have diagnosis of dementia or are likely to have a diagnosis of dementia in the very near future. And they all have close and supportive family that are worried about them and wanting to help. Every single one of them stated categorically that their wishes were to stay at home. They wanted to stay in their own environments. They really wanted to be able to keep in touch with their families and keep them in the loop, but not necessarily rely on them for support. But they wanted mostly to feel that safety and that safety net and feel supported. They knew they were starting to become tricky managing day-to-day life. So one of the things that we have four different kind of devices or products that we can services we can offer. The first one we called assisted comfort, and that's around the property itself. So we can install devices that will help maintain things like temperature in the home, humidity levels, carbon monoxide. So actually, if the person is struggling to turn their temperature, turn the heating up and down, we have a thermostat that's really simple to use. I don't know about you guys, but the fiddly buttons on most thermostats nowadays are really tricky. But it can also be changed from the tablet that we have installed in the home. So we installed this into the case studies that I'm going to talk to you about. We also do something like falls monitoring. So if the person does have a fall, they don't need to push a button, they don't need to call for help. It'll automatically send an alert to a responder or to our contact center to say there's a problem. We'll monitor the person's sleep. So we put devices into some of these homes where we will be able to know when the person's gone to bed, when they've got up, how many times they've been disturbed during the night. And also, every single one of them had a tablet with functionality to be able to call for help if they needed and to have reminders sent to them to prompt them to do things, but also to enable communications with people that are allocated to their account. So they're mostly their family members and loved ones. Every single one of the case studies had two responders, and mostly these were family members or close personal friends. And the way our system worked was that it would alert to responder one. If responder one wasn't available, it escalates to responder two. And when responder two can't pick up, it will go to our contact center who will get help for the person. It's a really quick whistle stop tour. So if you want to know more, we can absolutely give you that information. So just as a couple of examples. So first situation we found, service user was turning down the heating in the cold months. It was around Christmas time. It was that year where it was very snowy at Christmas, so it was proper chilly. I mean, I'm in September and I'm thinking of turning the heating on already. So we know from statistics that actually there's 30,000 excess deaths in winter, and over 8,500 of them are due to cold homes. So it can actually really impact somebody's health if they're sitting in a cold home, especially older people who aren't moving around so much. So in this situation, the responder received an alert to say that the temperature was too low. She was able to log into an app and actually increase the heat in that service user's home and ensure that kept the environment comfortable and safe for her. It also meant that she was able to have those discussions with mum. So she was able to ring mum and say, why are we turning the temperature down? What are you worried about? You know, how can we help? How can we resolve this? The great thing as well is that there is also humidity tracking. So we did have a situation where we had a gentleman who liked soldering in the house, and that caused the humidity levels to spike. So we were able to recognize that through it and ensure that he had a safe environment to do that in that wasn't going to impact his health at all. Benefits to all this obviously were maintaining health, which sparked conversation and resolution from family members to their loved ones, and actually it helps to maintain the home for longer. We had another situation, gentleman with dementia, very active actually. He was really good. He used to go out and go to a walking club once a week, so still quite active. But unfortunately, because of the dementia, that was starting to become difficult for him. He'd forget when to go, he'd forget how to get there. So he was becoming a lot more isolated and lonely. And what the tablet enabled them to do is actually call their dad on a video call. His family are quite large, but quite wide reaching, and weren't able to visit him regularly. But he was then able to interact with his family. He could speak to his grandkids. He started feeling more part of the family, feeling less isolated, and actually loneliness. Chloe did a fantastic presentation on this last couple of months ago now. Um, Actually increases our risk of real serious conditions, especially in dementia. You are at 50% greater risk of developing dementia if you are lonely. If you're not having those social interactions, you're 29% more likely to have heart disease, and you're 32% more likely to have a stroke. So, actually, I think sometimes we underestimate loneliness. So, obviously, this will help to reduce health risks for that person. It helped to decrease his isolation, and actually, the family felt a lot closer to him. We had one instance where a responder was alerted at 10:30 that the person they were caring for wasn't out of bed. They noticed that the person was up also that night. Quite more frequently than they were normally. So she went in to visit her mum and recognized that there was a problem, was able to call the GP, and actually it was a UTI that was diagnosed, a urinary tract infection. If left untreated, that can actually turn into a hospital admission, but also cause more confusion, cause falls, cause more risks in the home. So if it can be picked up a lot quicker, obviously it can be treated and those things can be stopped from happening and reduce that deterioration risk. The other benefit here is that the person's able to really recognize when care might be needed or more support might be needed. So benefits to the person really here is that we were able to give a faster response. So actually the service user, the person felt a lot better, a lot quicker. It helped reduce the risk of falls and that health deterioration. We have had instances, unfortunately, as we know, people are busy. So most responders that we have linked to our system are at work or having a family time of their own or dealing with other things. So we did have an instance where a lady had had a fall in the living room. She was getting up from an afternoon nap in her chair and she unable to call for help. She fell over. The responder is notified immediately, and if the responder wasn't able to respond, so in this case they actually had a meeting, so didn't respond, it escalates to the responder two, who was away on holiday at the time. Therefore, it will then escalate to our contact center, and then somebody will come. In this instance, manage to reach the person and get help to them, and an ambulance called out. The great thing as well is because it's a linked system, if it happens in the middle of the night, for example, and which, let's be honest, when people fall, it's normally in the middle of the night, the heating is automatically turned up to a more comfortable level. So if the property is too cold, you don't want someone lying on the floor because ambulances can still take a long time to come. The heating automatically sets to a comfortable level. Obviously, that gives this person a quicker response that helps to reduce anxiety. It will help reducing those long lies, which can cause more health deterioration in the future. And actually, even in this instance, in this case, the responders are still aware. So when responder one came out of their meeting, they were able to check their phone and see that something's happened. Our contact center will keep the responder up to date with what's happening, and they're able to then head off to the hospital to check on their loved one. So one of the great things about having this monitoring based technology is that no matter what support we put in, no matter how much care, how much people are visiting charities or whatever, there are always going to be gaps in the care. There are always going to be times where this person is on their own, and it's always going to play on those people's minds that are their loved ones that are trying to support them. So even if you had all this support, which I have to be honest, is quite a lot for a person, coming in twice a day for care, 30 minutes a day, a charity support worker visiting, a community centre they visit, family on the phone call, son popping in, there is still over 1,410 minutes a day that this person will still be on their own and at risk. So these monitoring devices can support with that. So, as I said at the beginning, we're more than happy to have conversations with you. We love talking tech, even if you just want to talk through options available to you. These are the contact details for our team. Cameron, as I said, is in the north, Kat's south and Wales, and Rick covers the Midlands patch. So please do take down our contact details and we'll happily answer any questions you might have. So now it's just an ask from you. We do, as occupational therapists, often need support understanding what the latest tech is, and it's great to network with other OTs. So Chloe has set up a fantastic OT tech group. So if that's something you're interested in doing, we talk about all different types of tech and all different types of processes. We have quite a lot of members. Please do pop your email or your name in the chat and we can get you some information across on that if you're interested in joining us. If you have a webinar that you think you might want to have delivered in the future, if you want to give us some topics or areas where you think would be beneficial, please do let us know. And do keep our eye out. We have got a paper coming out on this very topic that Chloe wrote, so that should be coming out via our newsletter and on our website shortly. And just as a last point for reflection, is it something that you consider in the future? So rather than considering your pendants or your carers, is technology something that you might prescribe in the future? Thank you for listening. I'm going to open the floor to some questions and I'm going to ask Chloe to come on to my panel. Can you hear me, Chloe?
I can, yes. So I've been busy answering some questions in the chat as I'm aware of the time.
Brilliant. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Very interesting presentation. So yeah, we've just got a couple of questions left. So I don't know whether you're happy to answer
Shall I
these.
fire? One of them was, how do you stop a person from unplugging devices?
Okay, it's a really, really challenging one, isn't it? With people unplugging devices, I think it's about considering what devices you're putting in place. Are they discreet? We're quite lucky with our system that all the sensors are very small and not very visible for tampering. For some people, it might be putting the system away in a cupboard on the shelf. It depends on the person and their
Absolutely. I
situation.
think
But
there is some great little devices on the market as well that you can put over plug sockets that stops them from being able to be pulled out. And as Chloe said, it's around that kind of discreetness and making sure that the devices are put away in places that aren't potentially reachable. And so one other question, I'll do the last one, and I appreciate it's now time to log off. What can I do if the person doesn't have the internet? So with our system, we do actually have a SIM card that you can use or a router that you can plug in. So we can provide the internet for that person. Often, actually, if you are looking at technology, it's worth having those conversations about installing internet because it may well be a better option for that person because in the future they may well need something more that might be better to be run through internet. But absolutely, we can still support with that because we can use other alternative methods. So thank you ever so much for joining us. There is a recording of it if you want to watch it back, and we hope to see you on the next one.
thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.